In this video, we're going to talk about Octopussy, the 13th film in the James Bond franchise and the 6th Roger Moore James Bond film. And this is a film where James Bond dresses up like a clown, where he tells a wild Bengal tiger to sit, and it does, where James Bond swings from vines of a jungle while yelling like Tarzan. And this is also the film where we get first-rate, non-stop action from beginning to end, where we get the most beautiful and toughest Bond girl in the history of the franchise to date. It has memorable villains in Kamal Khan, Gobinder, and General Orlov, and once again we get Roger Moore, cool, suave, and in top form as the quintessential gentleman spy. We feel that James Bond is having the time of his life saving the world, and it's good to be James Bond. However, when 007 fans from the 1980s think of Octopussy, we can't separate this movie from another James Bond film. And this was 1983, where the world got two James Bond films. The other one, a competing film starring the original Bond, Sean Connery. Because it was Bond versus Bond. It was Roger Moore versus Sean Connery, and we the fans were the beneficiaries. And this movie did incredibly well when it came out in the theaters in 1983. It was both a box office success and a critical success. However, unfortunately, time has not been too kind to this film, and it seems to have slowly dropped in stature, and now it's one of the more controversial Bond films, and some critics will rate it pretty much as one of the worst Bond films, and I just don't understand that. Forbes magazine did a ranking a few years back and rated this the third worst Bond film, while Entertainment Weekly, which is my personal favorite ranking, the one that most closely reflects my own personal list, generously rates this number 10 out of 23 Bond films. Due to the mega success of For Your Eyes Only, it was guaranteed that they'd be making another 007 film, and as promised, it would be titled Octopussy. Now, Octopussy would be the first James Bond movie produced by MGM. United Artists, who had produced every Bond movie since Dr. No, and had owned half the Bond franchise since Harry Saltzman sold them his shares after The Man with the Golden Gun, United Artists ran into some financial problems due to the box office bomb of Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate, and was merged into MGM, forming MGM UA, but was really an MGM company. Now, they would go on to make all the Timothy Dalton Bond films, the Pierce Brosnan movies, and the Daniel Craig Bond films. However, in 2021, Amazon bought out MGM, and now Amazon owns half of the James Bond franchise. However, Amazon and the Broccoli family were at a stalemate over the creative direction of James Bond, so Amazon made the Broccoli family an offer they could not refuse. Amazon paid the Broccoli family $1 billion for the creative rights to the 007 franchise. So the Broccoli family still owns half of James Bond, but Amazon now has 100% creative control over Bond. And let's hope Amazon doesn't do to 007 what Disney did to Star Wars. For director, John Glenn, who had done a phenomenal job directing For Your Eyes Only, was asked to return as director. And he's going to do a similarly grounded film, although he's going to add a little more absurd jokes in this movie. But like For Your Eyes Only, the main villain isn't trying to take over the world, but is rather just trying to make some money smuggling jewels. And Octopussy was going to be loosely based on two short stories written by Ian Fleming, Octopussy and another short story called The Property of a Lady. In the short story Octopussy, Octopussy is not a woman circus leader, but rather the story about James Bond tracking down a World War II war hero named Major Dexter Smythe, who apparently had stolen some Nazi gold. Bond tracks him down and gives him some time to settle his affairs, and then Major Dexter Smythe commits suicide by getting the poisonous octopus pet of his to attack him. And this segment was used in the movie and was spoken by Octopussy as a character background event. The short story Property of a Lady is about James Bond investigating a possible double agent who is secretly working for the KGB and is paid by auctioning a Fabergé jewel in the agent's name. And Bond investigates this and goes to the auction, and he notices when the KGB agent is bidding for it, Bond decides to keep betting just to see how much the KGB is willing to pay for this Fabergé gem. The movie was going to take elements from both stories and merge it into one long story. Unfortunately, Ian Fleming's two short stories, Octopussy and Property of a Lady, were way too short to support a full movie. Michael G. Wilson, who was the stepson of Cubby Broccoli and a Stanford lawyer, was being groomed to take over the Bond franchise. He was close friends with Hollywood screenwriter Raymond Sanchez, and Raymond Sanchez was one of the many writers of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Now remember, that movie was written by committee until director Nicholas Meyer put all the disparate elements together and wrote the final shooting script. Raymond Sanchez wrote the sequence where the crew of the Reliant goes down to Ceti Alpha 5 and discovers Khan's crew. In a casual meeting with Michael G. Wilson, Sanchez came up with a pretty good idea that it would be pretty interesting if James Bond would fight a female villain this time, a female villain of an all-female criminal organization. And then he went on further to say that the woman would be named Octopussy, and she would run an all-women criminal group using a traveling circus as a front. And rather than be a full bad guy, she could have a noble side and also be Bond's love interest. Sanchez came up with the idea to have this woman be the daughter of Major Dexter Smythe from the Octopussy short story, and that Octopussy was Major Smythe's nickname for her daughter. And this would connect the movie to the short story. And of course, Michael G. Wilson loved it. Michael G. Wilson and Cubby Broccoli hired novelist George MacDonald Fraser to come up with the story, with Richard Maibaum and Michael G. Wilson himself coming in afterwards to clean up the script. George MacDonald Fraser was the author of a popular series of books called the Flashman series, and it was about a hard-drinking, womanizing British officer in 1832 and his world travels, getting into adventures for the British Crown. And you can see why they chose him to write a James Bond movie. The original location of Octopussy was in East Germany. However, the filmmakers considered setting the movie Octopussy in Japan. However, George MacDonald Fraser set his story in India because a James Bond movie had never gone to India before. Plus, Fraser had become very familiar with India during his research for his last Flashman movie, which took place in India. Cubby Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson loved the idea because the two had gone to India before while location scouting for Moonraker and fell in love with the place. And they had really hoped that a future Bond movie could one day be set in India, and now this was their chance. And when they went to India for location scouting, they went to the city of Udaipur, known as the Venice of Italy, and they fell in love with the place. And they noticed all the landmarks from Fraser's screenplay. The Maharana's castle on the hill, which would double for Kamal Khan's castle, as well as a floating palace on the water, which was Octopussy's palace. It was all there in one city, within a few miles of each other. For the role of Octopussy, Richard Maibaum and Michael G. Wilson actually had B-movie legend Sybil Danning in mind when writing the character. Cubby Broccoli actually called Sybil Danning, and then she met with the producers. When she got home, she got the call saying that she did not get the role. They felt their personality was too strong, and they wanted someone softer for the role of Octopussy. Cubby Broccoli wanted Faye Dunaway to play the part, but Cubby Broccoli also felt that her salary would be way too expensive for the budget they had. They considered Barbara Carrera, who actually turned down the role so that she could star as Fatima Blush in the competing Bond film Never Say Never Again, mostly because she wanted to work with Sean Connery. Cubby Broccoli then considered someone of Southeast Asian descent to play Octopussy, and there were two prominent Indian actresses in Hollywood at the time, and they both auditioned for the part. The first was Paris Kambata, who starred as the bald alien empath Ilea in Star Trek The Motion Picture, and the second was Susie Quaylo, who was a character actress in the 1970s and was the wife of Sonny Bono after he divorced Cher. Today, Susie Quaylo is a best-selling author and a successful lifestyle guru, kind of like Octopussy. Another actress who was asked to audition was Maud Adams, who already played a Bond girl Andrea Anders in The Man with the Golden Gun, but we'll talk about her in a second. One of the first people hired for Octopussy was tennis pro Vijay Amritraj, who would play James Bond's ally and MI6 agent in India. Cubby Broccoli was a huge tennis fan and was a fan of Vijay Amritraj, and the two met at Wimbledon and had become friends. Knowing that the movie would take place in India and Armitage was born in Madras, Broccoli called him up and cast him in this movie. However, there was a problem. Vijay was a tennis star and not an actor and had never been in anything before. Therefore, he was not in the British Equity nor the Screen Actors Guild, and that meant he could not be in this production. So Cubby Broccoli called one of his producer's friends in the US, producer Leonard Goldberg, and asked for a favor. And he had Vijay have a very small guest role in Fantasy Island, and this got him into the Screen Actors Guild, which allowed him to be an Octopussy and get membership into the British Equity. And when I saw this movie, I had no idea Vijay Amritraj was not an actor, but rather a tennis pro. In fact, he was very well known in the tennis circuit, and he'd even beat John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors. And now the jokes about him playing tennis at the club and his backhand improving and him using a tennis racket to fight off assassins, it all makes sense. And I think he's quite good as Bond's assistant, considering he had never acted before. And years later, in 1986, he'll have a brief cameo as a starship captain in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. Roger Moore had signed a 3-picture deal which resulted in him starring in Live and Let Die, The Man with the Golden Gun, and The Spy Who Loved Me, and he made $1 million for each of those films. And that was a pretty good deal in 1970. Well, after his 3-picture contract was up, he was able to negotiate his salary on a film-by-film basis. So for Moonraker, he was able to negotiate a salary of $4 million. And that was a pretty good deal for Roger Moore, who made more in one movie than he did from the last 3 films combined. And let's face it, it was a pretty good deal for Cubby Broccoli too, who had a genuine hit on his hands with Moonraker. Now for For Your Eyes Only, Roger Moore was able to negotiate a salary of $4.6 million. And for this movie, the dance of negotiation had begun, with Roger Moore saying that he didn't want to play James Bond because he was getting too old.
Negotiation.
Well, Cubby Broccoli did his part in the negotiation and acted like he didn't want Roger Moore, and he began to audition other actors for Bond. And who knows, maybe Cubby Broccoli was beginning to agree with Roger Moore and was thinking that he may be too old to play Bond. So Cubby Broccoli auditioned Michael Billington, who was Roger Moore's backup in Live and Let Die, and then played Triple X's lover in the opening of The Spy Who Loved Me. They also asked Maud Adams, who played Andrea Anders in The Man with the Golden Gun, to fly to London and help them audition Bond actors. And Maud Adams was devastated to learn that Roger Moore was being replaced. She and Roger Moore had a great working relationship on the set of The Man with the Golden Gun, and she had tremendous respect for him. But to help out Cubby Broccoli, she helped audition the new Bond actors. And they auditioned one famous actor, an American. They auditioned James Brolin, and to the production team's shock, he completely nailed it. He was electric in the action sequences and really looked like he could fistfight his way through a crowd of assassins. And he played it in a very sophisticated manner and affected a New England accent that gave him a slight British feel. And this worked for James Bond. Plus, he had excellent chemistry with Maud Adams. James Brolin even had screen tests with Vijay Armitage, who was one of the first actors hired. So they were really serious about casting James Brolin as Bond. What Maud Adams likely did not know until she started the screen test was that she was there for more than just help with the readings. She was being eyed for the role of Octopussy. After all, she had no reason to suspect that this was the case, because she had already been in a James Bond picture and was killed off in that movie, and no actress up to that point had played 2 different Bond girls before. But they loved her screen test audition, and she was cast as Octopussy. And I thought she was great in the role, and at that time she impressed audiences as a stronger, very different Bond girl, one of the best Bond girls yet, and even now she is ranked as one of the top. She is beautiful and sexy, but also has this kind of maturity and wisdom that is often missing from the Bond girls. She's very, very strong, and at 38 years old, she was very mature and age appropriate to James Bond. And so James Brolin was strongly being considered for James Bond in Octopussy. Sorry, Roger. But then something extraordinary happened. Another film studio announced that they would be making a competing James Bond film called Never Say Never Again, and it would star original James Bond, Sean Connery. So how did this happen? Well, to make a long story short, back before the days of Eon and Albert Broccoli, Ian Fleming met with movie producer Kevin McClory and his screenwriter Jack Whittingham to try to make a James Bond movie. And they came up with a short story about a villain named Blofeld who ran a huge criminal organization called Spectre, who had stolen 2 nuclear bombs and was planning on blackmailing the world. And they called it Longitude 78 West. The partnership fell through, and then Ian Fleming published the story and renamed it Thunderball, but he didn't give credit to Kevin McClory nor James Whittingham. And I don't know what Ian Fleming was thinking or what he thought would happen, but Kevin McClory sued and was winning, but Ian Fleming had a heart attack, and so he was persuaded by friends to settle. And in 1963, the settlement said that Ian Fleming owned the rights to the book, but had to give credit to Jack Whittingham and Kevin McClory. However, all movie rights to Thunderball went to Kevin McClory, and that included the rights to Blofeld and Spectre. Well, there was a problem, Before the settlement, Eon Productions had just made 2 movies, Dr. No and From Russia with Love, that featured Blofeld and Spectre. And that's why the third film, Goldfinger, didn't have Spectre nor Blofeld in it. And as a clever compromise, Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman brought in Kevin McClory to produce their 4th film, Thunderball, gave him full producer credit, a whole bunch of money, and even let him have a cameo in the movie. In exchange, Eon Films would get the rights to Blofeld and Spectre for 10 years. Now why 10 years? Well, Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman didn't think they'd be making James Bond movies in 10 years. So boy, were they wrong. And that's why they were able to make You Only Live Twice and On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Diamonds Are Forever, which heavily featured Blofeld and Spectre. Well, by the time of this movie, their 10 years had run out, and the rights to Blofeld and Spectre reverted back to Kevin McClory. Now Kevin McClory was free to make his own James Bond movie, and enter Jack Schwartzman, who acquired the rights from Kevin McClory and decided to make his competing James Bond film. And there was no way that James Brolin could compete with Sean Connery. And so Cubby Broccoli had to go to Roger Moore and ask him to be in this movie. And ultimately, Roger Moore negotiated a salary of $5.2 million to return as 007 for the 6th time. And Roger Moore was very happy that Maud Adams was hired as his co-star in this movie. Moore loved her portrayal as Andrea Anders and felt that she was his favorite female co-star in a Bond film. For the villain, Cubby Broccoli chose his good friend, French actor Louis Jourdan. And Louis Jourdan was already a prolific actor in France in the 1940s and had successfully transitioned to Hollywood in the 1950s. And just prior to playing Kamal Khan, he played Anton Arcane in the cult classic DC comic movie Swamp Thing. For Octopussy's right-hand woman Magda, they cast Christina Wayborn, who was Swedish like Maud Adams, and the two had a great time working together talking Swedish on set. However, despite the fact that they were both from Sweden, they had very distinct looks and very distinct energies and contrasted well on screen. For the main villain henchman Gobinder, they cast Indian actor Kabir Bedi, who was a prolific actor in India and well known throughout Europe. He was a huge star in Bollywood and was considered a huge heartthrob, and hiring him would bring in the Indian audience, which it did. For the second villain, Russian General Orlov, they cast Steven Berkoff, who apparently arrived at the audition wearing a samurai outfit. It was Cubby Broccoli's daughter, Barbara Broccoli, who now runs Eon Films, who recommended Steven Berkoff after seeing him in the play Greek, which was written by Steven Berkoff. And in the early 1980s, Steven Berkoff was the go-to actor to play villains, and today he is best remembered for his trio of General Orlov here, Victor Maitland in Beverly Hills Cop, and Lieutenant Colonel Sergei Podovsky in Rambo First Blood Part 2. And when members of the cast heard that the title of the movie was going to be called Octopussy, many were shocked and some were very embarrassed. However, when they discovered that it really was the title of one of Ian Fleming's short stories, they felt a little better about the title. Now here's a weird bit of Hollywood connection. Cary Elwes, who played Wesley in the 1987 Princess Bride and played Robin Hood in the 1993 Robin Hood Men in Tights, was the production assistant on this movie, and one of his jobs was to drive Roger Moore to the set every morning. And Cary Elwes was a nervous wreck and always drove really slow because he did not want to get into a car accident and be the one to kill James Bond. But he said that Roger Moore was a true gentleman and a class act, and calmed him down, complimented him on his driving, and gave him permission to drive faster if he wanted to. Now the movie starts with one of the best opening pre-credit action sequences of all time. James Bond is in Cuba, and we see a very Fidel Castro-like leader enjoying a horse show. And while this was indeed supposed to be Cuba, these sequences were filmed in London. James Bond is in disguise as a horse trainer, but then turns his clothes inside out and then is disguised as Cuban officer Colonel Luis Toro. And he sneaks into the hangar with a bomb, intending to blow it up, but gets captured by the real Colonel Toro. However, his female ally helps him escape, and he gets into the trailer, which appears to have a horse, but the horse lifts up to reveal a tiny airplane. And this airplane is really cool, and it just feels like something an international secret agent would be flying. Now, this scene was not a special effect. This mini airplane actually exists. The airplane is known as the Acrostar DB-5J, and it was created by BD Aircraft Company, and it's for real. It weighs 220 pounds and it can reach speeds of 300 miles an hour, and it held the Guinness Book of World Records for being the world's smallest airplane from 1979 to 2004. And not only is it famous for starring in this movie, it also made appearances in Budweiser commercials and commercials all throughout the 1980s and 1990s. The Cuban army shoots a heat-seeking missile, and Bond leads the heat-seeking missile into a hangar, and he's able to use it to destroy the hangar. And when Bond flies inside the hangar, this was accomplished by building a replica of the Acrostar flying on its side, with Roger Moore riding inside and being driven inside the hangar. And the Acrostar replica was mounted on top of an old Jaguar automobile. And the Jaguar was hidden by placing objects in the foreground. But if you slow down the footage, you can actually see the posts connecting the Acrostar to the Jaguar. Still, it was very convincing when you're watching it. Now, for the explosion of the hangar, a miniature hangar was built and exploded. Bond flies to safety, and in a very James Bond-like moment, he is able to make it to a small local gas station, and he says,
"Fill her up, please."
We then get the musical montage All Time High, written by John Barry, with lyrics by Tim Rice, and performed by Rita Coolidge. Rita Coolidge is best known for the song Higher and Higher, which she sang with her then-husband, Chris Christopherson. And All Time High is one of the 7 song titles that does not refer to the film's title in it. And it's one of the first songs in a while not to have the title of the movie anywhere in the lyrics. But I guess you can't have a song with the lyrics Octopussy being repeated in it. And whatever you think of the opening song, the musical theme is beautiful and it works perfectly for the movie. And after being absent in For Your Eyes Only due to tax issues in the UK, John Barry was able to return to write the music for this movie. And when Barry wrote All Time High, he wanted to avoid using instruments associated with India, such as the sitar, which he felt would have distracted from the drama of the movie. And today, it's considered one of the lesser James Bond opening songs, but I find it very catchy, and at the release of Octopussy in 1983, All Time High did spend 4 weeks at the #1 spot on the United States Adult Contemporary Singles Chart. We then open to the movie proper with a clown being chased by 2 knife throwers. And when I first saw the movie, I thought this clown was James Bond, but he's hit in the back and falls into a river, and we later learn that this is 009. Stabbed in the back with a throwing knife, he makes it to a posh party at the British Embassy and reveals that he has a Fabergé egg. And when James Bond goes into M's office, he notices a much younger secretary named Penelope Smallbones, who's supposed to be Moneypenny's assistant. And it was obvious that they were planning on phasing out Lois Maxwell and replacing her with Smallbones. And Lois Maxwell makes no secret of her displeasure, even when acting in this scene. And Lois Maxwell admitted that she was very upset until she learned that the actress for Penelope Smallbones was the daughter of one of her friends. She was played by Michaela Clavell and was the daughter of James Clavell, the author, and her mother was April Stride. And Lois Maxwell and April Stride were friends coming up together in the modeling world when they were both 18 years old. So it really is a small world. And in M's office, we have a new M, and he's played by Robert Brown, who played Admiral Hargraves in The Spy Who Loved Me. And they never really address this, if this is supposed to be a recasting of the old M, or if Admiral Hargraves was promoted to the head of MI6. They never addressed it, leaving it very ambiguous. While I personally like to believe that Admiral Hargraves was promoted to the head of MI6, I did quite a bit of research on the internet, and most fans tend to think that Robert Brown is playing a recasted version of Miles Messervy, and that Bernard Lee and Robert Brown are indeed playing the same character. Well, nope. For me, this M is Admiral Hargraves. M informs Bond that 009 has been killed and that the Fabergé egg he was carrying was a fake. And the real one is being auctioned off today by an anonymous seller. And this Fabergé egg is called The Property of a Lady, which is a subtle reference to one of Ian Fleming's short stories, Property of a Lady. They assume that the Russians might be selling The Property of a Lady in order to fund some covert operation, and thus James Bond is sent to investigate. We then move to the Soviet Union, and we go to the meeting of the KGB generals, and we get General Gogol. And here we get actor Paul Hardwick, who is playing Soviet President Leonid Brezhnev. And when this scene was filmed, Brezhnev was still the president of the Soviet Union. However, by the time this movie came out, Brezhnev had died in November 1982, making this scene an anachronism. And even though the James Bond novels were written in the climate of Soviet tensions between the West, if you think about it, this movie is the first time that James Bond is actually fighting Russians in the James Bond movies. Even in From Russia with Love, the bad guys were Spectre, not the Russians. And in The Spy Who Loved Me, they were allies, and in For Your Eyes Only, they were friendly competitors. And there's a reason for this. Cubby Broccoli believed that the politics between the Americans and the Russians would soon change, and he didn't want the James Bond movies to feel dated. Anyways, the Russian generals strategically planned their domestic and foreign policy, while one of the generals, General Orlov, has much grander plans for the Soviet Union. And Steven Berkoff's portrayal of General Orlov is incredible. The second you see him, you know he's the villain.
The West is decadent and divided.
And he's played with the exact balance of intelligence and unbalanced insanity. He's totally deranged. And he plans an aggressive campaign to expand the Soviet Union into Western Europe, certain that the West has become too decadent to mount a proper defense. But General Gogol thinks he's crazy and just shuts him down. James Bond is sent to the auction to investigate the Fabergé egg, accompanied by MI6 antique expert Jim Fanning, played by Douglas Wilmer. And they spot Kamal Khan, an exiled Afghan prince and wealthy businessman, that he's bidding for the egg. And Bond decides to bid for the egg himself just to see how badly Kamal Khan wants it. And Jim Fanning looks like he's about to have a heart attack. And while looking at the egg, he switches the real egg with the fake one, and also forces Kamal Khan to spend much more money than he planned just to end up buying a fake Fabergé egg. And the Fabergé egg will be the MacGuffin for this movie, or at least until General Orlov smashes it. Now, for those that know, the Fabergé egg was not created for this movie. Fabergé eggs are real, and they were made by Carl Fabergé from 1885 to 1917, and they were presented annually to the wife of the Russian Tsar, Alexander III, and later to his son, Nicholas II, as Easter gifts, and a total of 50 were made, and 42 have survived to this day. And what's cool about it is that each of the Fabergé eggs are totally different from each other, and they're really cool. And I enjoy looking at Fabergé eggs. I think they're amazing. And the Fabergé egg used in this movie is based on a real existing Fabergé egg. So while in this movie they call this egg the property of a lady, which is in honor of the name of the short story for which the movie is based, the real Fabergé egg is called the Imperial Coronation Egg, and it looks very similar to the one used in this movie. Carl Fabergé made the coronation egg in 1897, and in 1979 it was sold to Malcolm Forbes, who bought it for $2.16 million. And he held on to it for over 20 years, and in 2004 it was sold to a Russian businessman named Viktor Vekselberg, who was the CEO of the Renova Group, who bought 9 Fabergé eggs from America for a total price of over $100 million. And now the significance of this is that these Fabergé eggs now are back in Russian hands. And I think that's pretty cool. M sends James Bond to India to investigate Kamal Khan and what connection he might have to the Russians. And in India, he meets up with MI6 contact Vijay, who breaks the fourth wall by playing the James Bond theme song on his Snake Charmer Punji flute. And when Vijay says, "This was the wrong cover, I hate snakes," this line was totally true. Vijay Armitage had a deadly fear of snakes and really struggled to film these scenes.
This was the wrong cover. Taxi. I hate snakes.
Taxi, sir.
That afternoon, Bond goes to the country club and observes Kamal Khan and sees that he is clearly cheating at backgammon by using loaded dice. And James Bond uses Kamal Khan's loaded dice, and I love how he rolls double sixes and doesn't even look at what he rolled, and he just knows that he rolled 2 6s. It's a total James Bond move. Totally awesome. And Kamal Khan's henchman Gobinder pulls an odd job and crushes the dice with his bare hands. And this scene where Kamal cheats at backgammon was taken from the novel Moonraker, where Bond catches Hugo Drax cheating at bridge and beats him at his own game, and in the book, Hugo Drax tells Bond, "Spend the money quickly, Mr. Bond." And on the way back to his hotel, James Bond is attacked by Gobinder and his goons. And it's a really fun fight scene that happens on the streets of India. And you can totally tell which scenes were filmed on location in India and which scenes were filmed on a set in Pinewood Studios. On location in Udaipur, the filming crew had a problem with locals showing up to watch the filming. They wanted 5,000 locals in the background, but tens of thousands showed up, and it was difficult to clear the large crowds to film. Incidentally, to this day, Udaipur is very proud of the fact that a James Bond movie was filmed in their town, and to this day, the town of Udaipur publicly airs Octopussy nightly. And I think that is totally awesome. Now, it's not exactly the most politically correct of action sequences, and they use a lot of cliches associated with India, like snake charmers, fire breathers, sword swallowers, and people lying down on a bed of nails. But you gotta admit, it is very fast-paced, and it is a lot of fun. It's clear that the action sequences are trying to evoke the market scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is ironic because Steven Spielberg wanted to direct a James Bond movie, but was rejected because of lack of experience. George Lucas actually offered him the job to direct Indiana Jones as a consolation prize for not getting the James Bond job, and possibly as a way for Spielberg to eventually get to make a James Bond movie. So Indiana Jones was copying James Bond, and now you have James Bond copying Indiana Jones. And while driving away, Vijay informs Bond that this tuk-tuk is a company car and can drive at incredible speeds.
Vijay, we have company. No problem. This is a company car.
And this tuk-tuk actually was built in real life at Pinewood Studios and really could achieve speeds of over 70 miles an hour. Vijay takes Bond to their secret MI6 base in Udaipur, India, and Q is there working on some new gadgets. And here at the smashing door, we get the return of Smithers, who is played by Jeremy Bulloch, who also played Boba Fett in Empire Strikes Back. Q arms 007 with a pen that spills acid and plants a listening device inside the Fabergé egg so Bond can listen to everything with an earpiece. And when Bond returns to his luxury hotel, he is invited to dinner by Kamal Khan's female henchman, Magda. And Bond lets her steal the Fabergé egg since he has a listening device in it. And when Magda escapes Bond's hotel room and rolls down to the ground by unraveling her sari, Christina Wayborn, who was very athletic, insisted on doing the scene herself. And this scene was filmed in 2 locations. When Magda falls off the balcony in Bond's hotel room, that was on a set in Pinewood Studios in England. And when she twirls and lands on the ground, that was on location in India. Magda escapes and is picked up by Kamal Khan, but then Gobinder, who we can assume has been hiding in there all night, yikes. Bond is knocked out and is taken to Kamal Khan's castle, which sits atop the Aravalli Hills overlooking the entire city of Udaipur. And this is a real castle known as the Monsoon Palace. And this is a real place in Udaipur. It was built in 1884 by the Maharana. Now in the morning, Kamal Khan goes to meet the mysterious Octopussy, and it's like he is reporting to her. And it's an intriguing scene, and it makes us very curious who this Octopussy is. We don't see her face, but we see that she's feeding this incredible-looking blue-ringed octopus, which is very poisonous in real life. It is an extremely venomous species of octopus found in the coral reefs near Japan and Australia. And it produces a tetrodotoxin that is the same poison found in pufferfish and in poison dart frogs of South America. And 1 milligram of it can kill a person, and apparently there is no known antidote. And Octopussy's palace on the waters of Udaipur is the Lake Palace Hotel and is a real hotel that existed prior to this movie. And it became very famous after the release of this movie, and the hotel is now known as the Octopussy Hotel. James Bond is captive and Kamal Khan's prisoner, but like all great James Bond villains, Kamal Khan invites Bond to a luxurious meal. And that night, he uses his acid pen to escape his room and explore the castle and sees that Kamal Khan is working with the Russians, who we know from earlier is the dastardly General Orlov. Kamal Khan is making fake replicas of Russian antique jewels, including a fake Fabergé egg. Khan and Orlov agree to meet in Karl-Marx-Stadt in East Berlin, and General Orlov, mistakenly thinking that the real Fabergé egg is the fake one, smashes it. And Kamal Khan, knowing that this is the real one, gives out a look of horror. But once smashed, they spot the bug that Q put inside the real Fabergé egg, and now they know that Bond may be on to their entire plan, and now he must really be killed. Bond discovers a room where Kamal Khan stores the bodies of people he's murdered. Bond hides in a body bag and escapes the castle, and Kamal Khan and his men go on a wild hunt with Bond as their prey. And this scene is very action-packed, but it's also got a lot of insane jokes. he encounters a Bengal tiger and tells it to sit, which it does. And I, like most people who saw this scene, thought it was just crazy. Like, it's just so random. However, the scene was supposedly a reference to a very popular dog trainer named Barbara Woodhouse. And she had a best-selling book called No Bad Dogs, The Woodhouse Way. And she also had a very popular TV show in England at the time of Octopussy called Training Dogs the Woodhouse Way, where she would train dogs by using a kind but firm tone, and her common catchphrase on the show was, sit, and she would also lift her hand. So many people in England would have gotten the joke. And knowing this, it does make the scene a little less crazy and random. And then James Bond swings from a vine while giving a Tarzan yell. And I don't think there's any explanation for this. It was pretty ridiculous in 1983, and it's ridiculous now on rewatch. But
Economy tour.
that night, he explores Octopussy's castle on the water, and he gets there using a fake crocodile boat, which I really liked. Presumably, he needs this fake crocodile boat because the waters are filled with real crocodiles. And we meet Octopussy, and Maud Adams looks fantastic, and I love her in this movie. Not only is she insanely beautiful, but she's smart, she's tough, she's powerful, and she's not exactly a good guy. She's complicated. She's also a smuggler and a criminal who is working with Kamal Khan and Orlov to smuggle jewels. And I love this. It puts Octopussy and James Bond on closer footing. Octopussy knows of James Bond because years ago he was sent to track down her father, and he gave him a few days to settle his affairs, of which he chose to commit suicide. And Octopussy appreciated Bond giving him a choice and wanted to thank him. Kamal Khan comes in to inform Octopussy that Bond escaped, only to find out that Bond is her guest. And I love how irked Kamal Khan is.
You have a nasty habit of surviving.
You know what they say about the fittest?
Bond and Octopussy share a moment, and Maud Adams and Roger Moore have excellent chemistry together. And another important factor that makes the scene work so well is that Maud Adams, who was 38 years old at the time, seems much more age appropriate than previous Bond girls. Roger Moore was 54 at the time, so with only a 16-year age difference, in Roger Moore's James Bond terms, they're practically the same age. That night, Kamal Khan hires Indian assassins to murder James Bond, and there's one assassin who has a yo-yo buzzsaw weapon, and that is totally James Bond. Unfortunately, they kill poor Vijay, and they're about to kill James Bond, but a drop of water alerts him. And incidentally, filming this scene, the actor with the buzzsaw fell and broke his arm, and he begged not to be replaced. He had his arm put in a cast, and he completed the scene, and you can see the cast in some of the scenes. This is a great fight sequence, which ends with Bond and the assassins falling out of a window into the waters, where the assassin is eaten by a crocodile. When I saw this in 1983, I was confused because I wondered if the crocodile boat had like a mode that acted like a real attacking crocodile, which really didn't seem to make sense to me. Well, I don't think so, because now I see it as the assassin got eaten by a real crocodile, and this presumably gave Bond enough time to escape, find his crocodile boat, and get away. James Bond remembers that Kamal Khan and Orlov are to meet in Karl-Marx-Stadt, in East Berlin, where Octopussy's circus is also performing. And we meet the two knife-throwing twins who killed 009 at the beginning of the movie. We learn that Magda is actually working for Octopussy, and Kamal Khan's plan is that he has fooled Octopussy into thinking that the circus will be a front while smuggling Russian jewels out of East Berlin. And one of the stops for the circus is Fellstadt Air Base, a U.S. air base in West Berlin near the East Berlin border. And Fellstadt Air Base is not a real air base, but was created for this movie. And the sequences of the base were actually filmed in the Royal Air Force Upper Hayford, an RAF base in Oxfordshire, England. For the circus, they actually converted the 007 stage in Pinewood Studios and turned it into a real working circus. They hired hundreds of child actors to be in the audience, and the cast and crew also brought in their families, and they had a great time while real circus performers entertained the audience. Orlov and Kamal Khan have replaced the jewels with a nuclear bomb, which will go off and destroy the U.S. airbase, triggering the Russian advantage in Western Europe. Bond kills one of the knife-throwing twins and confronts Orlov, and this leads to a crazy sequence where Bond is chasing the train while driving his car without wheels on train tracks. It's incredible. Another train is about to crash into Bond's car, but Bond is able to jump on the circus train in time. The scene where the train hits the car and sends it flying, and when the car lands, it lands on a small boat, and the stuntman playing the fisherman barely got out of the boat in time before the car smashed into it. It was a closer call than they had planned. The KGB find Orlov's car filled with Russian jewels.
Where is General Orlov now?
He was last reported heading towards the border.
And at the border, Orlov is shot and killed while chasing after Bond.
Common thief. The disgrace to the uniform.
But tomorrow, I shall be a hero of the Soviet Union.
Now this leads to an incredible action sequence where Gobinder and one of the twins is chasing Bond on the train. And what made this sequence difficult to film was that the top of the train was not flat, but had a curved shape. Now unfortunately, while filming this sequence, one of the main stuntmen, Martin Grace, who had done much of the famous stunts throughout the Bond franchise, including hanging off the side of the helicopter in For Your Eyes Only. While hanging off the side of the train, a concrete pole was jutting out from the ground, and they had not planned it properly, and in fact the train moved into an area where they had not scoped it out, and Martin Grace slammed into the pole at a speed of the moving train, and he fractured his leg and fractured his hip, and spent 6 months in the hospital recovering. And while he was in the hospital, Roger Moore stayed at his bedside. Now fortunately, he did make a full recovery and was able to work on A View to a Kill. Bond and the twin fall off the train, and it looks like the knife thrower has the edge on Bond and says, "For my brother." But then Bond turns the advantage around, kills the twin, and said,
That's for 009.
It is a great James Bond moment. Bond hitches a ride with a German couple, and in town he tries to make a phone call to inform his superiors about the bomb, but a lady won't get out the payphone in town, so James Bond steals her Alfa Romeo. Now incidentally, this German town was actually built on the set at Pinewood Studios. He makes it to the Air Force Base, has to blow through security, and disguises himself as a clown, just like 009 did. Meanwhile, Kamal Khan and Gobinder say goodbye to Octopussy, and they plan to get as far away from the airbase as possible. And I love how for a second the car won't start, and you see the panic in their eyes. And on the road, Khan and Bond actually crosses paths on the road, and he says,
Good, let him keep going. He'll be late, and we'll be rid of him, too.
Bond, dressed as a clown, with base security hot on his trail, informs the general and Octopussy that there's a nuclear bomb in this very circus. And this is an incredibly tense scene, and given that Bond is dressed like a circus clown, what makes it work is that Roger Moore completely commits to the scene without an ounce of camp. And the scene is brilliant. Bond tells Octopussy that Kamal Khan and Orlov had betrayed her and left her to die. And James Bond is able to disarm the bomb with only 1 second to go. Later that night, Octopussy and her circus troupe raid Kamal Khan's castle, and it's a great scene, where Octopussy's all-female army are more than a formidable match for Kamal Khan's guards. Now this scene was filmed at Pinewood Studios in England, and it was filmed in November. And it was freezing outside, and you see all those female actors dressed in very skimpy clothing? They were all freezing and had to pretend that they were in the hot nights of India. And while filming the sequence, Christina Wayborn, who did the action herself, actually broke her toes in one scene. She was kicking a bazooka, and it was to be replaced with a plastic bazooka, but the stuntman made a mistake and grabbed the real metal one, and when she kicked it, a couple of her toes fractured. James Bond and Q arrive in a Union Jack hot air balloon. Kamal Khan and Gobinder kidnap Octopussy and escape in their airplane, but James Bond is able to catch up to them on his horse and hangs onto the top of the airplane that is flying in the air, and this is an incredible stunt where James Bond disables the plane's propellers and Khan orders Gobinder to go out and kill him.
Go out and get him. Out there? Go.
This leads to an incredible action sequence where Gobinder and Bond are fighting on top of an airplane that is really flying in the air. And sure enough, two stuntmen actually did this scene on a real airplane that was in flight. And that is just incredible. Man, they really knew how to make movies in the 80s. Bond gets the upper hand when he smacks Gobinder in the face with an antenna and sends him falling to his death. Bond rescues Octopussy and the two jump out of the plane in time as Kamal Khan crashes the plane on the side of the mountain. And of course the movie has to end on some inappropriate sexual joke, and here the joke is that the rowers are chanting "in and out." And thus ends a fantastic James Bond movie. And this movie is a perfect continuation of The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, and now Octopussy. This film was a huge success. Made on a budget of $27.5 million, it had a very successful box office. It made $68 million in the US and went on to make $187.5 million worldwide, nearly equaling the box office for Your Eyes Only. This film earned mostly positive reviews. Critics praised John Glenn's directing and praised Louis Jourdan's performance as Kamal Khan, and many praised the incredible action sequences. Those that did not like the film generally criticized the absurdity of the many of the crazy jokes. So, how did this movie do against the Sean Connery film? Well, first you have to understand the historical significance of the idea of Bond versus Bond and this idea of Sean Connery versus Roger Moore. And it's pretty cool to think that Roger Moore was only signed on to do 3 films, and here he is in his 6th James Bond movie going head-to-head against the big guy, the original James Bond. Well, Never Say Never Again came out 4 months later, and when the box office receipts were counted, Octopussy beat Never Say Never Again. Never Say Never Again, which was still a huge success, made $160 million, which was $27 million less than Octopussy, and Never Say Never Again had a much higher budget at $36 million. And this definitely gave Roger Moore a huge boost of respect as our generation's 007. So much so that despite Octopussy being planned as Roger Moore's last James Bond movie, Cubby Broccoli would throw a huge pile of money at Roger Moore, over $7 million, to star in one more James Bond movie, A View to a Kill. That's more than 40% more than he had made for either For Your Eyes Only or Octopussy, and it was an offer he could not refuse. This movie would cement Roger Moore's legacy as James Bond, because Sean Connery made 6 James Bond movies, and with this movie, Roger Moore, who was initially just going to make 3 movies, ended up making 6 movies himself. But however, with the next film, A View to a Kill, Roger Moore would make 7 James Bond movies, 1 more than Sean Connery. Although if you consider the non-canon Bond film Never Say Never Again, Sean Connery also made 7 James Bond movies. That ends my video on Octopussy. Join me next week for Never Say Never Again. That ends this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great time.